Hello, I'm Jamie Adams, actor and board game enthusiast.
Hello, I'm Sam Maggs, roller of dice and painter of tiny plastic men.
And I'm Iain McAllister, reviewer for The Giant Brain, and this is Brainwaves, bringing you the best in tabletop gaming news. And the headlines for 29th of April 2018. Kickstarter fraud scandal rocks Asia. Hasbro announces their earnings, and they're not as good as expected. And the Cardboard Edison Awards have been announced.
Oh, I've just got to stop you, Iain. We've got some late breaking news here coming from our reporter Jamie, who's downtown. Jamie, are you here? That's right, Jamie. I am here in the downtown area, where costumed critters cooperatively and competitively create construction craziness. Yes, what I can only describe as a super battle is going on. Fresh from his tower climbing antics, the friendly ungulate Rhino Hero has assembled his animal compatriots, each of them racing to build up and be on top of an edifice that is increasingly looking like Salvador Dali had a heavy night of drinking, then wandered into an architect's office. Well, that sounds serious, Jamie. Can you see any of the superheroes? Indeed I can, Jamie. I see Rhino Hero leaping up the precariously slender tower he's just erected as we speak. He's level with Giraffe Boy on the top. And they're rolling dice. Come on, Rhino Hero! And Giraffe Boy is moving down a level where he's triggered a roll-off again. This could go on and on, Jamie. No doubt, Jamie. Well, what are people on the street saying? Oh, I'm sorry, Jamie, I was busy. Yes, I have spoken to members of the crowd. They like the bright colours and massive physical presence this is generating, and I have to agree that it looks impressive. But there are those who are saying it's ultimately too simple a construction for them. Too much luck in the dice of their favourite hero and their method of building. All fair points, but we'll see how this contest scales up. Back to you in the studio. Thanks for that, Jamie. Bit odd, wasn't it? I'm sorry, Jamie, I'm going to have to interrupt you. The structure has fallen down. Yes, Giraffe Boy was too daring in his wall placement, and it's toppled like a house of cards. Oh, the huge manatee. People are running. I can't see signs of any. There he is. Rhino Hero has emerged unhurt and clutching the highest hero medal. He's the winner. Back to you, Jamie, in the studio. I'm off to celebrate. Thank you for that, Jamie. That was a bit odd.
Fascinating stuff, Jamie. Thanks very much. So it appears that we have our first instant of proper Kickstarter fraud within the board game community. This has been covered elsewhere very well by Calvin Wong, and I would also suggest you check out the Unlucky Frog Gaming podcast on this as well, with Calvin on it. The Borders Cafe and online shop based in Singapore was one of these shops that would organise retail pledges for Kickstarters, because getting board games in that area is very expensive. So they would order many copies, get people to pledge to them directly, and then people would get their games that way. And all this was basically fine for quite some time until around about November, December last year. There were cracks to show. People weren't quite getting their games in time. Various other things were going wrong there. Some of this stuff got sorted out fairly quickly, but what has since happened is that company has seemed to have vanished completely, along with tens of thousands of dollars worth of stock. Several companies have come out saying, we now consider our stock stolen. I will put a link to the Calvin's article in the show notes, but I suggest you go and check it out. It's a fascinating read. He's done some excellent investigative journalism work there. And yeah, check out the Unlucky Frog Gaming podcast. They had him on recently talking about the scandal and what's happened. It's an incredible thing. It's the first time I've heard of something of this scale within the board game community. There's been a couple of other Kickstarters that have failed spectacularly and have been considered sort of fraudulent in the tech sphere, but this is the first time I've heard about it in board games.
It seems the board gaming community is now big enough to have massive fraud.
Well, yeah, that's it. It's like it's one of those things where, like, as the community grows and games get more expensive and Kickstarters get bigger and bigger. I mean, we're seeing board game Kickstarters are some of the highest funding things on Kickstarter now.
I believe it was at least 60-70% of all games funded last year were tabletop games.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and they have some of the they rank in the top 10 of like the amount of money into a given Kickstarter. It's an incredible amount of money, and some people are bound to want to exploit that. Unfortunately,
Absolutely, and we've seen
yeah.
it the same in the rise of counterfeit copies of board games as well coming into the market. And I suppose just as the market gets bigger and demand for games gets greater, we're just going to unfortunately see more and more things like this.
Game and toy company Hasbro has seen its share prices and revenue take a tumble recently. In the first 3 months, its revenue fell 16% to $716.3 million, well below the $824.7 million that Wall Street expected. This is a shortfall of $112.5 million. Hasbro are explaining that the closure of Toys R Us in the recent months is one of the main reasons and has hit them incredibly hard.
Of course, the reason that it's relevant to the board game community is that Hasbro owns some of the basic titles. They also own Wizards of the Coast and other hobby outlets as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to those properties down the line as Hasbro tries to claw back some of that money.
Interestingly, Hasbro shares did rise 3% about on Monday, which is possibly a sign that there may be interest in maybe buying Hasbro if this run of bad luck continues.
Moving on from big boys into small publishers, the Cardboard Edison Awards have recently been announced. This is a yearly competition run by Cardboard Edison, a fine site I suggest you check out if you're anyway interested in design. Lots of helpful advice on there. It's all about small unpublished games. Anyone can apply to the Cardboard Edison Awards. There's a vetting process down to the sort of final 10, which are then played by a panel. And this year is Animal Kingdom from Stephen Aramini, who has won, and you can go and check that out on Cardboard Edison's site. We will link that in the show notes, and there's a lot of other cool wee games in there that made into second and third place, and some that didn't quite make it through but are still really interesting ideas.
Over on Crowdfunder, UK charity CYEN are raising funds for Uganda's second Village Board Game Convention. The funding page features a video of young people praising last year's event, surrounded by copies of games such as Terraforming Mars, Ticket to Ride, and Forbidden Island. Pandemic designer Matt Leacock is a supporter of the project and has designed special rules for his game Mole Rats in Space, specifically so that Ugandan rural children can learn to work together to reach objectives. Other events at the convention will include a Dragon and Flagon tournament. I think, Jamie, you'll be very interested in that.
That's quite cool.
And also a lark. As of Thursday, the 26th of April, the project is currently sitting at £3,306 of a goal of £3,400 with 6 days to go. It seems like a fantastic project to really get behind.
Absolutely. I think it's a great project, and it's fantastic to see games being used in this fashion.
Wonderful bringing all these people together.
Absolutely. Going back to the very first episode of Brainwaves, a mere month ago, it has recently been announced that Mansions of Madness is to become a fully fledged computer game. Now, the first Mansions of Madness was an interesting, fairly complex board game with a bunch of rules that one person had to look over and make sure everything was okay for the cooperative side of stuff. The second version introduced an app element, which is absolutely fantastic. I played it and it's really interesting. And now it's going full-fledged computer game. Whether it'll be exactly the same as the board game and therefore reduce the impact of that game, I don't know. Details are a little sparse at the moment. But this is obviously one of the first things out of Fantasy Flight Games' new entertainment division, which are producing apps and interactive things on computer.
And I think, again, it's great to see kind of the board game and video game worlds crossing over and hopefully bringing people into both mediums, really. So it'd just be good to see where that goes, really.
I think it is going to be, I think as you said, Sam, I think it's going to be quite handy to see people who might buy the game and play it online or on PC or video game and go, oh, that was really good. Okay, this is based on a board game. Let's see how the board game plays.
Absolutely. And I don't think the fact that it doesn't fully represent the board game as a downside. I think it's fantastic that it is offering something that is new and different and isn't just a
carbon copy.
Absolutely.
Fury of Dracula has just had an announcement of a 4th edition. The game, whose license was owned by Games Workshop, which was originally published by Games Workshop, and then Fantasy Flight, and now is being held by WizKids, will be released in July. It will come with pre-painted miniatures and larger poker-sized cards for both the investigators and for Dracula.
It's not that I see this as a weird move, and also not necessarily an unnecessary one, because obviously you've got a fantastic game there that's well loved, and Games Workshop obviously want to get published since they're split with Fantasy Flight. However, I would have really liked to have seen a GW version of it, possibly. I know that releasing board games of this style isn't currently really their thing, but purely for the miniature quality, really. You know, we've seen a lot of things come out of WizKids that the pictures on the website look fantastic, but it's just the big question of what's it actually going to look like.
Yeah, of course, as you said, it's pictures we see on the website, and when it comes to the actual game, is there going to be that quality? And pardon me for being cynical for a moment, but having collected and played Star Trek Attack Wing for a number of years, the initial molds of the games and the paint jobs on the initial molds of the ships were pretty bad. They're making several headways now. They're getting better, but it was not something that you really enjoyed. You bought it for the game, not for the models.
Yeah, maybe it'll be the definitive version of the game. Who knows?
Maybe.
Who knows?
Speaking of vampiric activity in the board gaming world, it has recently been announced that TES is returning. TES is Vampire the Eternal Struggle, the World Darkness vampire collectible card game that was very, very popular for a very long time, but unfortunately went the way of many collectible card games around the sort of mid-90s glut of these things. It's poked its head above the rafters every now and again over the last few years, but it's now being picked up by a group of very high-tier players who want to bring the game back, and they're apparently doing this in conjunction with White Wolf. It looks like it's going to be sort of fixed expansions, in sort of akin to the way that Doomtown is currently expanding, but exactly what the details are is a little sparse at the moment. And for me, I prefer to see a proper reboot of the game, try and bring it back into the public eye a little bit, and bring it back maybe in an LCG-style format. So whether this will be a good thing or a missed opportunity remains to be seen.
At the very least, it's good to see, dedicated fans, making a concerted effort to bring something that they love into, back from the dead, as if you pardon the pun.
My concern would be that because they are dedicated players, that they will not be able to see the wood for the trees and will mainly just be producing stuff that they like and might be popular in that community, but not really bring new people into that game, which I think any sort of community game like that, so any sort of competitive card game or miniature game like that, always needs that new blood coming in, and whether these expansions will do that, that's a big question.
I completely agree with you there.
And finally in the news this week, Asmodee has introduced its Modern Classics line. In their words, Modern Classics refers to a small group of pioneering titles that have left a lasting legacy on the board games market. These include Ticket to Ride Europe, Catan, Carcassonne, Dixit, Pandemic and Splendor. I think this is a fantastic idea.
Yeah, it seems like a decent lineup, yeah.
Yeah, just anything that really brings people into the hobby with kind of clear titles that I think do represent the hobby really well.
Represent the hobby now, definitely. Exactly, because as I was pointed out in a video by John Perkis of Actual Lol, when people say, you listen to films, you listen to music, or you watch films, and they assume you talk about the most recent films and music. So when you say, "Oh, I play board games," people immediately jump back to Scrabble, to Risk, to Cluedo, and to Monopoly. So it's good to see Asmodee kind of going, well, here are the games that we think are this generation's. I think they're all, a really good selection. I really enjoy playing them. And I can't wait for more people to get introduced to all these.
You really enjoy playing them?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we can work with that. Your name?
Jamie Adams.
And your specialist subject?
Asmodee Modern Classics line.
The Asmodee Modern Classics line. Here we go. In 2015, which major science fiction film franchise received its own edition of Carcassonne?
Star Wars.
Yep. Spanning the 14th to 17th century, during what period of European culture is the game Splendor set?
Renaissance?
Correct. What was the first standalone spin-off of Z-Man's Pandemic franchise?
Pandemic the Cure.
Yes. In Matt Leacock's Pandemic, players take on the role of members of the CDC. What does CDC stand for?
A Centre for Disease Control.
Absolutely right. In what year did Klaus Treber's Settlers of Catan win the coveted Spiel des Jahres?
1993.
1995. Included in the Asmodee Modern Classics line is Ticket to Ride Europe, and not its original predecessor. Europe introduces 2 additions to rules and gameplay. These include tunnels and what else?
Train stations.
Quick on the draw and correct. Who designed the tile-laying game Carcassonne?
Pass.
In Dixit, what do the pieces used to mark each player's score resemble?
Frogs.
The correct answer is rabbits. In Season 5 episode of The Big Bang Theory, the recombination hypothesis, the main characters are seen playing which board game?
Catan.
Correct. In Splendor, players collect various... I've started, so I'll finish. Players collect various colours of gemstones to spend on cards. These include emerald, sapphire, ruby, diamond, and onyx. A joker piece that can be used in place of any colour is represented by which element?
Gold.
It was gold. Jamie Adams, you had one pass. Who designed the tile-laying game Carcassonne? That was Klaus-Jürgen Wehr.
It was close something.
Jamie Adams, you have 7 points.
Okay. What just happened?
I'm sure it'll happen again.
Okay, I'll be afraid of that. We're going to move into our discussion segment of the show that we call Brainstorms. There's been a lot of controversy recently about Wonder Dice Games, who have been accused of stealing a board game design from a French designer who showed them the game a couple of years previous. They are releasing a game called Nostromo, based on the Alien franchise. And it was recently that Bruno Fediti, the very famous designer, went on to Board Game Geek and basically said that these people had stolen this idea from another French designer. And that you should avoid this product at all costs because of that. So basically, we want to talk this week in Brainstorm about where does inspiration end for board games and where does plagiarism begin? And can you protect your game design? Can you protect the mechanics in a game legally? And even should you? What do you think, guys?
I think it's a really, really interesting point, and I think it's as the gaming hobby gets bigger and develops, I think it's something that, again, much like the fraud that we talked about at the beginning of the show, we're just going to maybe see more of, unfortunately, you know. But at the end of the day, it's whether you consider an idea someone's intellectual property. And I think across other platforms of media, that is considered someone's intellectual property and someone's idea, and they can copyright that. And I think the argument we're having here is, should that be considered the same for game design? And I think it's a really tricky...
You say idea, I mean, yeah, obviously, then that you get the difference, say, between mechanics and, I don't want to say theme, but like the design of it. So yes. Obviously there's no way to trademark a series of mechanics.
No.
But you say you put a particular theme or a particular spin on a theme, and you take it to someone, and then they produce it without you think. The argument could be made. But again, at the same time, it's all in the ether. Unless you take steps to to protect yourself, there's not really much you can say.
I think it's important to distinguish between copyrighting an individual mechanic, like for instance deck building or worker placement or something like that.
Yes.
And as Jamie says, copyrighting the whole IP, protecting the whole. I know that Wizards of the Coast successfully sued an online card game for being too close to Magic, and basically it was sued as the whole. This is way too similar to our property. Stop.
And I think that's understandable. I think what the conversation maybe is obviously you can't copyright a mechanic. However, a collection of mechanics in a certain arrangement will create a distinctive game.
It will create a game, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But as an amateur designer myself, you don't design in a vacuum. You can't. You are influenced by the stuff around you. You watch movies, you listen to music. You're influenced by the people around you, and you're influenced by the games you play. Of course, you are. Most designers will have a particular type of game they'd like to design a lot of. Like I like to design games where you're making a thing, so I get influenced by games that also include that, like Suburbia and things like that. I take ideas from those games and put them into my own because they're good. But yeah, yes. there's definitely a point where it becomes plagiarism rather than inspiration. Yeah. And in the case of Wonder Dice Games, what seems to have happened is that they were shown the design a couple of years beforehand. They said no, and then they've released this game a couple of years down the line. And from what I've read online, I haven't read the rules myself because they're all in French, and my French is non-existent. But basically, from the people who've read it, have basically said, yeah, this lines up a little too closely for comfort, effectively.
It's the old adage that inspiration is the sincerest form of flattery, Which is exactly
Yeah.
what you said. Like, you don't design in a vacuum. Everything you create or you think is going to be influenced by the media that you consume. It's all about finding that space where you go, I'm imitating it, but I'm not just cloning it.
Yeah.
Of course, this isn't the only recent accusation of copying game design. Last year, we had Oink Games from Japan accusing Werewords, the game published by Bezier, of copying Insider, published by Oink Games.
Yeah, absolutely. And previous to that, we had Leather Games, the publishers of Vast. They were accused of basically doing a sort of sci-fi copy of that game called Deep, I think it was. And
Deep Enemy Frontier.
the designer had since left the company. The designer Vast had left Leather's employment, and he was basically accusing them of taking effectively all the mechanics from that and putting them into this new game, and that game actually got cancelled because of all that controversy. There's an interesting question I hear every now and again on designer forums and amongst the local playtest group. Occasionally, it comes up is that should I, as a new designer, in some way protect my design? And the basic advice I've read from a lot of places is no, you should not. Most companies don't have the time, they don't care that much, and they've got their own stuff to work on in such a way that they will not steal your design. However, it looks like that is starting to happen. It's starting to happen a wee bit.
Yeah, it's cases like this that are gonna make people rethink.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, at the moment, we don't know which way this has gone. So, is someone in the process of being sued right now?
Only surface details at the moment.
Yeah, and I suppose it completely depends on which way this does fall.
Yeah.
Does it fall in the way of the designer or the publisher? With this as well, I think it is a not specialized case, but it's a specific case of a publisher seeing a design a couple of years previously, and now them obviously publishing something that looks extremely similar. Rather than Fantasy Flight putting out a game and then Z-Man putting something out that looks extremely similar, and there being a conflict there. This is something that wasn't previously published, and now a publisher who saw that design once upon a time is publishing that game and claiming it to be their own property.
Yeah.
No, I was looking again at the post by Bruno Faduti on Boardgame Geek forums, and it was saying that the designer had, looking at Bruno Faduti post on Boardgame Geek, saying that Wonder Dice is launching pre-order campaign. The publisher proposed a contract, but they failed to find an agreement. The contract wasn't signed, and then from what Bruno Faduti and the Société des Auteurs de Jeux, the French Game Designers Union, understand.
Which, that's cool that exists.
Yes, I think it's excellent. It appears to them the publisher simply stole the game from its designer, developing and publishing it without his agreement, without his name, and of course without royalties. That is all quoting Bruno Faduti's post on Boardgame Geek.
And I think that's the thing that's given this a lot of heft, is that it's not just anyone that's come out and said this. It's Bruno Faduti.
It's a leading... Absolutely.
Yeah. And I doubt he would just sort of stick his neck out for no readily apparent reason. He's trying to make a point about this. And yeah, I think Sam's right. That the advice is probably going to change a wee bit. I still think that if you are pitching to publishers, if that is the intention of whatever design you've got going, like one of the designs that I've got going at the moment, I'm planning to pitch to publishers somewhere down the line. If you rock up with an NDA, they're not going to look at you. If you're going to make people sign NDAs and that kind of thing before playing your game, it's probably not going to hold water, and it's probably not worth it. And you're probably going to get less playtesters as well.
But also, do you think it's just a sign of this was a small industry that's getting bigger, and in other industries that is commonplace?
I think it'd be interesting to see how the film industry cope this, because the film industry, is as a big industry, is almost over 100 years old now. Hollywood as the center of film thing. How did they cope in the first kind of glowing years when people were stealing ideas from them? If people were stealing ideas from studios back and forth, what were they doing to protect their intellectual properties or their styles?
Oh yeah, there's lots of weird cases of that, like Sean Connery having the rights to Thunderball and remaking it as
Never Say Never Again.
No, Never Say Never Again, and all sorts of weird things like that. But I think the closest comparison industry is probably music. where there's been a lot of cases in the last sort of decade or so of people suing for lines, for beat patterns, for all sorts of stuff, trying to say my father or I or whatever came up with this.
For melodies.
For melodies. And I think it's incredibly tricky because like we said earlier, you don't do anything creative in a vacuum.
Yes.
You are inspired by the stuff you see and make something similar because that's a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think so much of this is a relatively small industry, and we're coming up against things that haven't happened yet.
That's definitely as we get bigger.
And as things go on, these things are maybe going to become more commonplace, and people are going to start talking about it more and start to maybe accept more things. And I think it is looking at the films industry, looking at the
television industry,
book publishing,
music industry,
absolutely, and seeing how they deal with things, because surely we're still talking about people's intellectual property, which there has to be some ownership there.
I mean, I know a lot of people in the indie RPG scene, or I did for a while, and a lot of them would put the games out for free for a while and then put out the books, and it never hurt them. It helped because people got to see the game and that kind of thing. And certainly there's a massive sort of print and play. Yeah, I mean, culture. I don't engage in myself, but there's a massive print and play culture within the board game community as well.
Yes.
Which I'm hoping to put some of my board games and my game designs into as well. That's not something I've looked at much before, but it does exist. And surely some of those designs are bound to influence people to make other games. That's inevitable.
Absolutely. But
Secret Hitler was put out as a print and play first. Before it
absolutely.
got...
2 Rooms and a Boom.
And look at how much that exploded.
Yeah,
I mean, also,
absolutely.
I think it's getting to the point where we can't, but I think it's almost getting to the point where the board game industry can't, I don't want to say get away with, but it's the only word that's coming to my head. It can't get away with going, but it's a small industry. And we're getting...
And I hate to keep bringing up the point, but it is a small industry that's growing into a medium industry, and the way it's handled things in the past to do with copyright and intellectual property and NDAs and all these things surely has to change somewhere, as these things become way more prevalent.
Yeah, I think you're right, guys. As the industry grows, we are going to see more instances of this. There's a lot more money in board games than there has ever been, and there's bound to be that temptation to break the rules, to bend them, to defraud people out of their Kickstarter pledges, all this sort of stuff. That sort of slight element of essentially crime is going to come into the industry, and there's going to be some people that look to exploit it. However, I'd like to reiterate my point earlier that if you want to take a game to a publisher, don't be afraid of them stealing it, because most of them don't want to. They've got their own problems, they've got their own designs, they've got their own things to think about. The advice from the majority of game designers I've seen, Kickstarter and otherwise, is do not rock up with your IP protected to the hilt with your game design, because they're less likely to touch it. However, that advice might change if this stuff keeps happening down the line. Well, before we finish up tonight, gents, an interesting little piece of news that there's a blockchain-powered card game come out for the crypto geek in you. What on earth that means?
This is crazy and wonderful, and I have no idea about anything.
So again, we'll obviously link to this in the show notes like we do with all our news articles, but essentially it's a physical card game where you can print out cards. Each one will be unique. And the way you'll know it's unique within the game system is that it will be tied to blockchain.
Which, if those who don't know, blockchain is, or what it is, it's a ledger technology, which is one of the main things behind cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, the most famously well known.
Indeed, it's called Volition. It's from Seattle startup CryptoGog, which is also a fantastic name. And it's according to their article, it's a digital physical card game which is aimed at crypto geeks, card hobbyists, and digital collectors.
They say that, but in what way? Like, who is this aimed at? It's such a
it's the industry model. It's the model in a lot of weird things at the moment with anything to do with cryptocurrency or blockchain. Is like, we're going to put blockchain on something and it'll make money. Blockchain ? Profit.
I'd like to say, gentlemen, The company has applied for patents on establishing the mining of booster packs in an unpredictable yet deterministic way.
I love
So
it.
they're
I love
basically
it.
they're trying to copyright loot boxes.
They're going to try and get on the loot box, yeah.
Yeah, if they try and copyright loot boxes, that is not going to go well for them.
Sell your bitcoins and buy booster packs.
Yeah, sell. That's our advice here at Brainwaves.
Thanks very much for listening. If you like what you've listened to, then the best way to help us out is to share the podcast and drop us a review and rating on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at The Giant Brain, Instagram at Giant Brain UK, Facebook, The Giant Brain, website giantbrain.co.uk, or you can email us at giantbrainuk@gmail.com. If you have any gaming news, if you have any feedback, if you've got any questions for any of us, just don't be afraid, fire out an email. We'll talk about it, we'll bring it up. We want to hear from you. You can also support us via Patreon or Ko-fi, both links you'll find on the website. You'll also find links to all the news that we talked about in our show notes. Thanks for listening. Take care.